and welcome to our 12th annual Behind the Music Comic-Con panel, which we're bringing to you virtually this year. My name is Jana Davidoff, and I'm the CEO of Rhapsody PR. Over here is Alex Beck, who works with me at Rhapsody as well. Though we wish we could be there with you guys in person, we're so thrilled that we're able to at least use technology and bring you our panel this way. Before we get started, I wanted to give a big thank you to Eddie, Laura, Adam, and the entire team at Comic-Con for making these panels possible during these crazy times. We so appreciate that, and we're so glad that we could bring the fans our panel. That being said, we get to temporarily put down the masks that we've been wearing to the grocery store and to run errands and put on our superhero masks. And alas, now for our unmasked panel. Panelists, please wave when I say your names. First, he's the Emmy-winning and Grammy-nominated composer for his work on Fargo, Legion, Star Trek Picard, and Star Trek Discovery. Please welcome Jeff Russo. You guys can clap, it's okay. Next, we have the composer of Prodigal Son and co-composer of The Flash and Arrow. Please welcome Nathaniel Blume. Yay! Next, we have the music supervisor of Normal People, The Great, Fargo, and Legion. Please welcome Maggie Phillips. Yay! Next, the composer of Locke Key and the upcoming feature Run. Please welcome Torin Borrowdale. Yay! Sorry I'm saying yay so much, but it's warranted. Next, the composer of Twenties and Cherish the Day. Please welcome Amanda Jones.
Yeah.
Yay. And last but certainly not least, we have the 4-time Emmy-winning composer of hit shows such as Marvel's Jessica Jones, Homeland, and 24. In fact, he won Marvel's first Emmy ever, which is pretty cool. Please welcome Sean Callery.
Yeah.
And thank you, panelists, for all having names that are easy to pronounce. That was so smooth. Now our moderator. You'll recognize her as the badass Klingon commander turned Chancellor L'Rell on Star Trek Discovery. Please welcome Mary Chieffo. Woo! Oh my God, that's amazing. Take it away, Mary.
Just happen to have this. Thank you so much, Jana. I am so honored and thrilled to be able to moderate this panel. Huge fan of all of you and the incredible music that you create and celebrate and that make our stories all the more engaging to watch. So, katlo, as we would say in Klingon. Thank you. We're here today to discuss how music really builds some of our favorite worlds. And without further ado, let's get into it. And I'm going to be starting with dear Jeff Russo, who I had the experience of witnessing his creation. I've been in the scenes where they don't have the music, and then I see them on screen and see how he really makes them amazing. So my first question is, how different would you say your approach to scoring Star Trek Picard has been from scoring Star Trek Discovery?
You know, Star Trek Discovery, it's great. First of all, you're amazing and you're awesome, and you make my job easy. Like when I'm watching scenes that you're in, it certainly makes helping that scene a lot easier. Those two shows are very different in their approach to telling the story. You know, Star Trek Discovery is a very broad ensemble piece that is a lot more swashbuckling and a lot more action packed and a lot more, you know, there's a lot more discovery going on. Whereas in Picard, it's a lot more of a personal story. It's a lot more of an intimate telling of one person's journey. And in that way, I needed to figure out how to balance those two things while still staying inside of the Star Trek vernacular musically. So it's really about, you know, more about solo instrumentation versus very big orchestra. I used an orchestra on Star Trek Picard as well, but I did tend to utilize solo instruments to really accentuate the emotional moments for Picard and for the rest of the cast. And that's really the biggest difference. It's like one is a more sort of intimate, small telling, and one is a much, much bigger, much broader sense. And I sort of had to do both those things with the music.
Wonderful. Yes, and I've enjoyed all of it. And I always like to note that I picked up on the Klingon theme and the way that you placed it throughout, certainly a lot of certain plots that unfold in the first season, little clues if you're really listening. I just am a big fan.
Thank you. Thank you.
So next, Nathaniel, your first question from me is, how did you get involved in Prodigal Son, and how was the musical approach determined?
Well, there was a show on ABC a couple years ago called Deception that unfortunately died a fairly quick death. But the best thing to come of that for me is I met and worked very closely with Chris Fedak, who's the creator of that show. And when I saw that he and Sam Sclaver were developing this new series called Prodigal Son, I got in touch with Chris and expressed my interest. And eventually he sent me the script right before they were going to film the pilot. And I read through it and realized that Michael Sheen's character is a serial killer called the Surgeon. And so I kind of used that as a jumping point, got on eBay and ordered some surgical instruments, which you can do. And I'm actually kind of glad that we're doing this at home, so I didn't have to carry these through the streets of San Diego.
Oh my God.
So my musical team and I dried out chicken bones and snapped them with bone cutters. We cut gauze with scissors and, dropped these tools in metal bowls and stuff like that, and just created this sound library where we also were able to make software instruments that were playable on the keyboard and loops. And that kind of became the percussive foundation for the score, and the emotion and stuff like that just kind of sat on top of that with the strings mostly.
That is so fantastic. So cool. And yeah, I am so glad that you were able to show us that.
Yeah.
That would never have gotten into San Diego.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it would have been difficult to get that through security.
Wouldn't have happened, probably.
Yeah, but that's awesome, and a great lesson in being a part, just always being present and active in whatever project you're in, and not knowing where that's going to lead to down the line. Super cool. I love knowing that. Now I'm going to listen to it with all new ears.
Cool.
All right, so next we have Maggie. So you also worked on Snowfall, which takes place in the 80s, while The Great takes place in 18th century Russia. So how do you use music to provide context for a specific time period? How do you play within that?
It depends on the show completely. For Snowfall, we, John Singleton, Tommy Shalmy, and Andrew and I sat down in the beginning of season 1, which was probably like 4 years ago, and talked about it in depth, and really decided we wanted to be as authentic as possible, given we had some budget constraints, which, but as authentic as possible. And I grew up in the 80s, but not to age myself, I was a kid. So some of the songs I remember, but not all of them. And I certainly didn't grow up in LA. And with all these shows, I do a ton of research, but John Singleton honestly was there to really help and guide me in the beginning. And he was always my checkpoint about authenticity. Like I would send over stuff, and sometimes he would email me or text me. And sometimes he would text me like, I swear, like 2 a.m. in the morning. It was weird, but he would be like, it was not often, but like, this song isn't working. Like, that's not what would be playing in the club, because he grew up there at that time period. I'm going to miss that for season 4. And I'm right now trying to figure out a way to have that check. And I'll have it in place before I start season 4. I loved working with him, and loved being held to that authenticity. and then for The Great, I obviously didn't grow up in 18th century Russia, but The Great, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's a total tongue-in-cheek show. Like, it's just ironic. There's very little authentic about it at all. You know, I think they have the title card says historical facts might be disclosed or something like that, are often not disclosed. So it's totally, there's no reason to be authentic. And we had a conversation, Marion and Tony and I, early on about how we wanted to treat the source music there in the background, because there is choirs or there's a quartet playing in the background of a lot of scenes. And we decided to be authentic-ish, you know, like give or take. And so, again, just a lot of research. Like, I had never listened to Russian folk music from the 18th century. So I had to, actually, our composer, Nathan Barr, had someone who sang on a lot of those pieces, was from Russia, and he was an expert, and I started talking to him about it and having conversations with him, which was really helpful. But anyone who speaks Russian or is a Russian folk expert and are watching the show, they will see that we're like 100 years off here or there. So, but that's how, I mean, it's a fun part of the job. Like, I get to do research on every new project about a different genre of music, a different period, and it's one of my favorite parts of the job. So
I love that. I feel similarly. I always feel like any project I'm involved with, I get to research this whole new thing, or I get to get a whole new slew of books or whatever. It's such a gift of
it totally. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Next, Sean.
Hey.
Okay. So some of the first shows you worked on were La Femme Nikita and Sheena. Did those strong female characters help shape your approach when scoring Jessica Jones and Homeland, shows that also feature strong female leads, which I...
A show of hands, how many people saw Sheena? Can I just take it? Okay. So, yeah, that you had to dig a little far to find that one. I was, I think in 2001, I think was one of the very first times I was ever interviewed on 24, and someone said, "Hey, what's it like scoring a character, male lead?" And I realized up until that point, I never really thought about it. It just, for me, it has never really been an issue. It's just about the story and it's about the character. And in the case of Nikita, it's a woman with a very troubled, I think in the French film, she was a heroin addict, and she's got a good soul and a good heart, and has got, but has, contradictions, and Jessica Jones, superhero, with another wonderful heart, but also some backstory and some friction. Carrie Matheson in the real world, person with a bipolar disorder, trying to do her thing. I mean, the story really is what you follow, and they're both all in all cases, whether they're male, female, or now in the world where we're gendering into many different categories or different. I don't even know what the word properly is, but you follow the story, and thankfully these characters have been very, very compelling, and they've lasted a bit while. When Jeff was talking about Discovery, I was thinking about my work on Bones, because Bones was more of an ensemble piece, so there really isn't any specific theme for a specific character because it works so well as a unit. But in the cases of Nikita and Jessica and Homeland, most certainly it was the central character was driving. That's where you followed your nose. That's where you found the story.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the flawed female character. They're fun to watch, and yeah, the way that they can be supported by the music in all different ways can show all the different flavors. So thank you for all of you.
It's surprising. It's a wonderful. I mean, in Jessica was directed in season 2. It was all female directors in all season 2, and the second and the third seasons were about daughter and mother and 2 female best friends. That was one of them. I never ever had to write a story that I never had to score around such a story that explored so deeply those kinds of relationships. So it was kind of starting over for me in some respects. So
awesome.
Thankfully, people liked it, the show.
Absolutely, and to have that, to be open to it and excited by it is much appreciated and celebrated, certainly on my end. All right, Torin.
Yes.
So what was the inspiration behind the main titles on Locke and Key?
So Locke and Key, I mean, there's so many different genres that the show captures that I really wanted the main titles to focus on one idea, and that was what would it be like to discover these keys hidden throughout this house for the first time? So, it starts small. It starts with like a door slam, and then you're kind of like walking through the house looking for these keys and figuring out what they do. And you realize pretty quickly that, they're really powerful. So kind of with the size of the orchestra, it starts small and gets big by the end. And I wanted to kind of express like the limitless possibility with these keys. So we've got 40 strings, 13 brass, soloists, percussion, like it's really big. And I was really inspired by Debussy's Pour le Piano, the first movement, and Chopin's piano etudes. They all feature this like perpetual motion piano, and I felt like that kind of captured, how the mystery of the show unfolds and kind of the inevitability of finding the keys. And I landed on this little trilly piano figure that's kind of the basis for the whole piece. And so bringing it all together, you got piano and orchestra and percussion, and it's so big. And I really wanted to land on this fun sound for like, what would it be like to rediscover magic? And the other thing I wanted to do was kind of, tie the main titles into the rest of the show. So the main motif, which is G, B flat, G, D, C. I kind of wanted that to be like a hidden key that was embedded elsewhere. So like when you see Key House for the first time, you hear it, a legato version of that theme in the cello. And when they're exploring Key House, it's the bass line. So you're not really going to notice it. It's not very obvious, but like if you listen really closely, you can hear it.
Oh, wonderful. I do. I just delight in that, in clues that great art is just, the layers just keep unfolding and are fun to rewatch and re-listen to. Thank you for that. So great to hear all that. All right, Amanda. So how does your approach differ when scoring a documentary like Home to a comedy series like a Black Lady sketch show?
Yeah, they're very different. Let's see. So, a Black Lady sketch show, if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's so much fun. So it's a sketch show. So there's so many different spaces that you can explore. There's a spy sketch, and there's like parodies of horror films. And so the music kind of just like goes all over the place. And yeah, you can be very versatile and just kind of go for it. Whereas for Home, they had a different composer for every episode. But my particular episode, they really wanted someone to kind of like lean into like their songwriter sensibility. So I play in a band, I play guitar, and I sing, and so I was really excited to kind of like depart from the typical like film scoring vibe, and kind of like create an album for like the entire episode. And it became really ambitious, and it was amazing. And I enlisted like the drummer of my band, who's also my husband, and some string players, and then I played the other instruments, like mandolin and synth and guitar, and I used my vocals, which is really nice, kind of as like a band. But it was really great, and I kept like showing them stuff, and they're like, make it bigger, make it more, like make it like an album. I was like, I'm so happy to be doing this. And so there wasn't too much dialogue for that, so the music could really take over, and it's kind of huge and crazy, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that was kind of more of a cohesive thing. Like Home was much more of like creating this crazy sonic like masterpiece, whereas like a Black Lady sketch show was like individual episodes and skits were all very different, and varied and crazy.
Overall, though, it seems like just being able to be pushed and stretched in different directions and having people trust you with your instincts, which is so awesome and fun.
Yeah, I'm definitely grateful to work on so many different things.
Cool. All right, back to Nathaniel. So you and Blake Neely are co-composers on Arrow and The Flash. So how do you like working in the superhero genre, and what is it like to work with another composer on a show?
Well, for anyone who knows Blake Neely, it's pretty rough working with him. He's so nice and receptive to ideas and supportive. And no, but it's in all seriousness, we have about a 12-year working relationship now, and so we bounce ideas off of each other. We know how to interact with each other's music. and it's fun. You know, it's almost like a little bit of a game sometimes to try to take one of his themes and like try to do it in a way that he wouldn't even think to do it, or just not necessarily to impress him, but also to just kind of like have fun with it. So that's been great. And the superhero genre in general is really fun, and I think it suits me fairly well, because I've always kind of tended more toward action music. Growing up, when I was listening to film scores, I was usually like fast forwarding to all the action cues and listening to them over and over and over again. So obviously with the superhero show, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 at least scenes every episode that are going to need something like that. And then they're really well mixed up, usually with emotion, and with Flash, there's a lot of comedy to it. So shows like that just really keep me on my toes, and it's fun.
That's fun. Well, yeah, definitely. It's a joy.
Yeah, it is.
And experience, and that's so great to have a collaborative working relationship like that. I feel like that is the dream. Someone that you can throw things back and forth with.
Right. We just mesh well, which helps. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Next, speaking of it, so Jeff and Maggie, your collaboration with Noah Hawley, is it? Yes.
Holly.
No, Holly. On shows like Fargo and Legion must ignite some interesting conversations. So how do you all work together when it comes to the use of music on both of those shows?
Noah is
you
very...
take this, by the way, without even...
I will just take the beginning of this question, which is to say that Noah is very opinionated and musically opinionated. He's a musician. He is very, very, very hands-on with how the music is going to sound, and is always loving new ideas and always loving to listen to my ideas for score, Maggie's ideas for songs, and yet it's very collaborative. I mean, Maggie and I talk all the time on the phone about like, well, you're going to use this song. Well, how am I going to do this? And if you're doing that, will it work with this song, or can you do this? Or it's a very much a fun back and forth, because it's a playground that me as a composer, and I won't speak for Maggie on this, but for me as a composer, it's a playground that I don't get to play in very often. Like I don't get the kind of leeway, musically speaking, in most other shows or most other projects. It's very liberating in that way. Maggie?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I shouldn't have jumped in, because of course Jeff would take this, because he's been working with Noah for a lot longer than I have, and I came on for Fargo season 2, which was like almost 5 years ago, Jeff, and that's when I
crazy
when I first met Jeff, and I've told this story before, but we left the meeting and he was like, your whole career is going to change because of Fargo, and I was like, no. And it did. Like, Noah really opened the door up for me and gave me the gift of a show that people watch, and a show that I got to do what I wanted to do. I've been doing primarily indie film that entire, like the first 10 years of my career. So, and Jeff really took me under his wing for that first season. And I mean, I don't know if you remember, but like many conversations of me calling him, and like, 'cause it was such a big opportunity for me, and I was so nervous about it and wanted to do the best job possible. And Noah is amazing, and I love working with him. He is so smart that it is sometimes hard to understand his process, like his emails and his texts, and like you want to do your best work for him. And Jeff really helped me that first season. And then since then we have this like dialogue that's almost like sometimes we don't have to even talk. Like, I know what Noah wants. Noah chooses a lot of the songs, and for us it depends on the project. But yeah, like to speak to Jeff's point, like Legion for me was, Fargo has more parameters with source, but Legion there were no parameters at all, like nothing. I mean, because it was like the music was all about creating basically a dreamscape. like what, you know, we could put anything in there, and it was so much fun. There were no rules. It's harder because you're listening to everything out there, but yeah, it's just fun. I mean, I can't speak more highly about the working relationship, and I hope we get to do it for many years.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I think that, you know, Maggie and I work on other projects as well outside of the Noah Hawley produced stuff, and you know, our relationship on that level has really extended to other shows. Like I work on Snowfall with them, which has a very minor score role and a very major song role. Like Maggie's role is enormous in that show, and I, you know, contribute. Here's the little music.
We're like brother and sister in that he will make me cry and like provoke me, and I'll yell at him and like hang out. We've gotten to the point where it's like it's a fun. Wouldn't you say, Jeff? Like, yeah.
It's a really interesting and fulfilling back and forth to have a music supervisor who, generally speaking, I don't know if I can speak for any other composer on the panel. Like, generally, we don't really have that much connection with the music supervisors who do a job over here, and we're doing a job over here. But the shows that I tend to work on with Maggie, there really is this collaborative spark. There's really this collaborative thing where we really talk about, like, what's the song going to be? How is it going to be with score? What's the score going to sound like? So that might help me choose the song, or it might help to try to figure out a scene. And I don't really have that with any other music supervisor.
I don't either.
Yeah.
With composers. Maybe. No, you're the only one.
Aw, I love it. Awesome. Collaboration. I love that I feel like this is a through line, a theme that's happening in this panel, which I love. And also, I've already said how impressed I am with all of you, but the way in which everyone works within so many different genres, and, you know, it's incredible. I'm a big fan. My next question is for Sean again. So we were very sad to say goodbye to Homeland this year.
Yes.
But, how do you feel working on the last episode? How did you feel working on that last episode after 8 seasons with these characters?
Well, I will say, as I get into this, that we had, God, I can't believe I'm mental blocking on this. Kevin Edelman was our music supervisor on Homeland, and he made some really inspired choices in the show. And when there was a really heavy minute count for the score, and I heard a piece of source music come in over something, I'd be like, oh my God, you know, I mean, a minute to the show, I don't have to worry about that. But at the same time, it's really beautiful. It's so beautifully done. And then I turned to him, I said, you know, is this cleared? Because if the music hasn't cleared, there's always a chance it's going to be thrown back to us to do. And when you're in love with something, like when you, and I've heard some of your choices, Maggie, but when you make a great choice and it's tattooed into the producer's mind, it's over. I mean, you gotta do everything possible. So I tip my hat to you, and I'm very also happy that you guys have a category now.
Thank you. Me too. I appreciate that. Thank you, Sean.
No, you know what? Homeland was one of those shows that I thought was going to be a really easy show because it was a relatively low minute count compared to my coming off of 24, which is more an action series. This was more of a political thriller along the lines of All the President's Men, and things of that nature. It was an extraordinarily minimal score, and I never worked with Noah Hawley, but I think Alex Gons and him could have been separated at birth because trying to eke out, you know, he called me once in season 8 and he says, listen, I love this cue. He goes, and you know what separates the men from the boys? And I said, what is it? He goes, knowing that I can talk to you and say that you have to do something else, knowing it can be better. and it breaks your heart, but when you're in the war, you're kind of like, okay, it's a little bit of the fog of war sometimes when you're in it. But I will say that show is one of the few shows that I think every episode is like a bottle of wine. It was specifically crafted. It had, nothing was ever conventionally done. I don't think any of that happens on any of my other shows, but the detail and the way we played back, they came to my house to play back a 12-minute score. in real time. And we always found new ways to make something. So we sort of left it all on the floor, so to speak. I will miss the show. There was some talk. My favorite episode was one that featured Saul as a young man in the 80s. And I just wish they'd have a prequel, like a Better Call Saul, but Better Call Saul Berenson. Just go back to the 80s. So, but I know Claire Danes a little bit now, and I asked her last time I saw her. I said, you ready to be done? And she said, I am, and I'm not. She goes, I'm not really ready, but I know it's time. So that was sort of the perfect answer for me to answer your question there.
Yeah, that was going to be my slight follow-up question, but you got in there. I was like, with something that tremendous, there's always opportunity, for a prequel.
I think if you do a young Saul Berenson, if you know the show, I think you could. I think it'd be very interesting to do a Cold War drama featuring him, but you know what? I'll just move on.
Yeah. Yes, but put it into the universe. We said it here now. Cool. Torin.
Yes.
Here's my next question is, how did you select an orchestra as the sound for the score in Locke Key?
It was really the richness of the source material. Like, it's one of the most beloved horror comics of all times, and just so many complex characters, and it really felt like I wanted a score that would enhance the depth of the characters, and I felt like having all these melodic themes and having an orchestra to do that would be the best way. The last thing I wanted to do would be to write the sad cue or the action cue or the horror cue and then just have the editor put that everywhere. I really wanted every single cue to be like a living, breathing part of this world, and for it to all make sense, like logically and emotionally. So I didn't really want it to be too gimmicky either. I didn't want to, as with the hidden keys, that's as gimmicky as I got. Like, I didn't want the orchestra players to play with the keys or something silly like that. I wanted them to kind of have a classic cinematic type sound. Like, it could have come out 10 years ago or 10 years from now and it would still make sense. So, and working with the orchestra, was always fantastic. And additionally with the soloists, like, they bring so much life to the projects, and whenever you get to have creative input from they're masters of their craft. The flute player, the cello player, they've dedicated their lives to these instruments, so it's always great when you get to collaborate with them in that sort of way.
I studied drama at Juilliard, but I was around a lot of musicians a lot of the time, and it just became this thing. I was in the dorms all 4 years, and you just always were walking through the halls, hearing people playing various things, and that dedication and putting yourself in a room for hours to just, and I know that's so much of what you guys do as well. I have a deep respect for that. It's incredible. All right, the next question for Amanda. So you've gotten to work with some of the biggest names in the biz this year, such as Ava DuVernay on Cherish the Day and Lena Waithe on Twenties, and Robin Thede on Black Lady Sketch Show, as we mentioned before, which is all so awesome. Definitely fangirling. But so what was it like to work with all of them, and how did your approach change with the various projects? I know you spoke a little to Black Lady Sketch Show already, but just kind of
it was definitely a surreal experience for me. This was kind of like my breakout year, so to have like 3 things at that level was like pretty exciting. And so I think the I don't know, it felt very natural just because I've been writing forever. I think the biggest thing was just like trying not to be too shy and kind of getting over like my fangirlness, actually. Just kind of like walking in a room with like Ava and being like, oh my gosh, I have all these ideas and I'm like about to melt. But they're such like amazing leaders, and I learned so much from like Lena Waithe and Ava and Robin Thede. They're just like just their ability to delegate. It's something I'm kind of like learning how to do myself, and just to like for Lena, it's like she's been working on Twenties like for 10 something years, and for her to kind of that was my first pilot, and then subsequently the show was like picked up. But for her to just like have met me and I shared my work with her, and I definitely had to go through like the normal vetting process, but for her to kind of just be like, hey, yeah, like this is your first TV show, I'm happy to like have you like lead up this department and kind of create like the sound for the series, for the pilot, for the series. Like that's so exciting that she was just able to like give that piece away, and she was like, yeah, here you go, you can do it. Yeah, it was amazing. And then with Ava was like very very specific about certain things, but I still had like a lot of autonomy just to kind of do whatever I wanted to do, which is really cool. And yeah, just identify some themes. There's like looking kind of like some really basic stuff, and kind of move forward from there. But and then with Rob and Phoebe, yeah, I feel like everyone kind of like knew what they wanted, but they still gave me so much room for me to be an artist, which is really exciting. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I got really lucky for the first couple projects. It hasn't been too like intense in any sort of way. I feel like everyone's kind of let me be this like whimsical person that creates music and hasn't been too like intense at all. So I'm really grateful.
That's wonderful. Well, it's a true testament to your talent for sure. You're such a lovely human outside of your work, but it's clear that your talent is also a reason why they keep asking you back. So congratulations on all of it. It's thrilling, and I'm so just thrilled to hear that they are great leaders and that it's been a great collaborative process. So.
Oh yeah, it's been beautiful.
Yay! All right, back to Jeff. So it's a little more Star Trek, but not Discovery, because as you spoke about Picard earlier. So you play such a great job playing homage to the Star Trek musical heritage, which we saw in Discovery and see in Picard. So could you speak more to incorporating past pieces within particularly the Picard score and that balance between the nostalgia and then the innovation?
I never actually thought of it in that way. My interest in the previous scores, it has been, academic, right? I think that they're so fantastic that some of the best composers that have ever been have written some of the most iconic themes for this particular franchise, Jerry Goldsmith and Fred Steiner and Alexander Courage. And yeah, I mean, the list is pretty long. So whenever I get a chance to help tell the story by just pinging on the heart a little bit, where, by playing the Courage theme or playing Jerry Goldsmith's theme or Jay Chataway's theme or any of these themes that literally all you have to do is play a couple of notes and you're instantly taken right there. That makes my job easier. So I love doing that because it's thrilling for me to weave that into something I've written, because it gives me the opportunity to jump 5 steps without having to do much. I just have to use those 3 notes and then it really puts me there. I'm not afraid to do that because I'm standing next to these people thinking like, I don't know what I'm doing. These guys knew what they were doing. I'm just gonna, I'm standing on their backs. I'm standing, on their capes or whatever you stand on when they pull you along, So it's thrilling for me. And it's also thrilling for me to join them in creating some new thematic material. Like I started my sojourn into Star Trek's world with Star Trek: The Next Generation. That was my entry point into becoming a Star Trek fan. I had seen movies previous, but I was really too young for it to really take hold. And it wasn't until Jean-Luc Picard became captain and I started watching that I really got interested. So when I had the opportunity to write his theme, I wanted to pay homage to the past, but I wanted to have a very unique and separate feeling for him going forward, something that he would have that would be apart from the Next Generation. Now, I did tip my hat at the end to Goldsmith's Next Generation theme because, I start with a flute and I end with a flute, and flute was very important to him. And I knew that I was going to do that, and that was going to be how I tipped my hat to the past, but I wanted it to really be looking to the future. And that to me is the most fun I get to have in Star Trek, is that I get to combine my sense of what the future of Star Trek sounds like and what it looks like musically, and also I'm able to incorporate what the past is and really sort of take us right to that nostalgia. It just feels good, and I think fans dig that. They dig that.
I was gonna say, because I follow so many different outlets on Twitter and stuff, and like when spoiler, but when 7 of 9 appears,
Wait, what?
What? He was on all the ads. That's true. The Voyager theme, the few, like, they picked it apart. I mean, some of the ones I follow, I mean, if someone's gonna pick up on it, the Trek fans will, and they love it so much. And I've noticed, particularly with your composition, that's something they consistently celebrate online. So.
It was very apparent to me too when I used 2 notes from the original Romulan theme in the first episode. I literally ba-bum, ba-bum. That's all I did. It was 2 notes in 2 different rhythm, and I did it kind of like, I wonder if anybody will pick up on this. Like, I just wonder if anybody hear it. And the first episode came out, and my Twitter was flooded with, oh my God, the Romulan theme! Ah! It was very fulfilling to me to know that people are paying that close attention, and I could just use a very small thing and have it be that effective and have that sort of response. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, next, back to Maggie. So this is a fun question. As a successful woman in the industry, do you feel a certain responsibility to include more female artists on your soundtracks?
Yes. Just really quickly before I answer this, fun fact for any Trek fans. My uncle was Neelix on Voyager.
That's your uncle?
Yeah.
Oh my, yes.
I know. I grew up so proud of my uncle. It was so cool. He was on Benson too. But anyway, I talk about what's important. Yes, I do. I feel it's very important to me, and it's something that I've become way more outspoken about the more successful I've become. I think most women who have been in this industry can relate, but sorry, there's a plane. I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and the first 10, it was me walking into a room of maybe 4 or 5 dudes, and 4 or 5 white dudes, to be frank, for the most part. And it was hard for me to speak up. It was really hard for me to share my opinion and learn to have a voice. Oh God, I didn't mean to I'm getting emotional, because I want to encourage other female artists and music supervisors and composers to learn to speak up, because the more I started speaking up, the more I realized people really did value my opinion, and it took a while. And we're filming this when other people are talking about not having their voices heard. So anyway, let's get back to the question. Female artists. Yeah, shit, I got sidetracked, sorry.
Well, I just, to your point, I just want to acknowledge, I mean, that your emotion over it is very moving to me, and I feel very similarly. And I think it's that passion, that using that as the fuel is a huge part of where we are right now, and recognizing that if everyone's voice is heard, we're just going to have a better world and a better collaborative, lovely. This is the theme that's already coming out of this conversation.
Yeah. It's been that's a whole other conversation, but it's been fun to start having those conversations with my team and my peers and music supervisors, and how can we give people the voices that need to be heard. But back to female artists, it's interesting. For the first 10 years, I noticed this all the time, is if I sent a song over for an end titles or a montage, and it was female vocals for a male character or a male protagonist in a montage or an end title scene, I almost always got the response that they didn't want a female speaking for a male character. And I started noticing a trend that if I ever did that in reverse and sent male vocals over for a female character, I never got that response. And it took me a long time to start calling people out on that. And once I did, it was, I just hadn't thought about it, you know? So I think that that's important to note. And the more I started calling out people out on it, the more I think we've had a change. And also with the Me Too movement, I'm working with a lot more females, and I'm being heard more. And I think I had that platform with Handmaid's Tale. That was my first big platform, and I went in season 2 I didn't do season 1, and I watched season 1 and had that reaction that there weren't enough female artists representing the characters. I mean, it's probably arguably the most feminist show out there, and I noticed a lack of female voices, and so I went in with that agenda, and I tried to do my best. I mean, one thing that people don't know about music writers, maybe everyone here does, but we don't have the final say. Like, we can share an opinion and we provide options, but it's ultimately someone else's creative vision. And so you do what you can, and I try to do what I can. And yeah, I'm going to keep trying to do what I can for everyone. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Truly. It's an empowering moment for all of us. It's a challenging moment, but it is a moment where we are reflecting and being more empowered, and just hearing you speak to that gives me a lot of thank you. And I have become a huge advocate for representation behind the scenes.
Yes.
As I've been involved with Trek, being on a show that's so much about representation in front of the camera, I've realized how essential it is for that to be true throughout. So I'm thrilled to be supporting that in any way I can.
Thank you.
All right, so speaking of strong women, we're back to Sean talking about winning Marvel's first Emmy ever for Jessica Jones. So that must have been quite thrilling. What was the moment like for you, and do you have a favorite memory from scoring that particular show?
Well, Jessica Jones was the first show that I ever worked on that had a female showrunner, Melissa Rosenberg. And she's just a brilliant storyteller. I mean, it was, and like all good showrunners, you kind of want to just get under their skin in terms of what they're all about and the story they're trying to tell. And we would have a lot of discussions about Jessica. And as I think I said earlier, in the second and third season, it was really more about the relationships between Jessica and her mom, and Jessica and her best friend. And she also made a conscious decision to bring all female directors into season 2. And, you know, I just have to say, from the point of view of the job I had to do, I was working, there was no difference in terms of my wanting to connect and do the best job for this person. It was just a brilliant human being with a great idea for a story, and I just wanted to dedicate myself to that. I will say that when it came time to, and also in Homeland, there was a fundamental instruction I had, which was whenever Carrie Mathison, Claire Danes was alone, I would be scoring, I was always asked to score the show through her eyes, someone suffering from a bipolar disorder, and sometimes how she saw things. Just very interesting to think behind the eyes of a person, whether they're male or female. But in Jessica Jones, in the third season, the relationship between these two best friends, I must admit I had to talk to Melissa quite a bit about that relationship, just to have her convey to me a bit more about the things that she thought were important about that relationship. And because I really wanted to, you want to have some aspect of ownership of your point of view on it. And my favorite piece of music in that season was the theme that I developed between these two friends. It was a friends that were tight, and then the friendship got busted open, and then it sort of healed again. Mm-hmm. So there were notions of betrayal, healing. You know how you have such a good friend that you can't even say things because it's such a rich relationship. Mm-hmm. it was trying to find a musical way to say that without commenting or being too sentimental. And I think that was probably the hardest part of the job that year. But I missed that show as well. I mean, that show was just, it had its own wonderful energy, but it has to go. And Marvel was very happy. I mean, it was, I don't know why Marvel's been nominated for a lot of things, and all very worthy things to be. They should have, more. I mean, the fact that mine just came up when it did was really wonderful. And I felt very proud to be part of that family. Mm-hmm. By the way, that was the other story thing about, like, Jeff with Star Trek. Taking on the mythology of that is in and of itself something to hold. Well, Jessica Jones had a fan base. I didn't know anything about Jessica Jones. I knew really nothing about her. So I was being dropped into a world that many people had a lot of opinions about. So that was a very interesting part of the gig, which once you settle in, then it becomes the writing and the music, and anyway, a long answer for a simple question, but that was as good as I could do it.
Yeah, no, and much all of the thought and energy you put into it, obviously, was very evident. So, and congratulations again on that win. Going to Amanda, kind of coming back to what we were just discussing with Maggie. So you are the co-founder of the Composers Diversity Collective, which is an organization that uplifts and strengthens the diverse composer community, which is awesome. So if you could tell us a bit more about that and how you got involved.
Yeah, so it was founded by Michael Abels, which I hope most of you guys know. He did Get Out and us, and he's an amazing guy, and Daniel Hart. And yeah, like back in 2018, we had our first meeting. I forgot where it was, like at WME or something. We were talking, it was this really great mixer, and it was just really cool to see. They were just kind of like a one-off thing at first. It was kind of like, hey, this is something we should do. And then I went up to Michael afterwards, and I was like, hey, I'd really love to, I previously worked at Lionsgate, so I had been in a position of like A&R, and I worked in TV music, kind of like staffing composers, music supervisors, music editors, and so I was kind of like happy to help, like, kind of be like the A&R arm of like the Composers Diversity Collective, because I had like so many connections with different studios to kind of facilitate like just kind of open dialogue with our group and like the music departments of those studios. So and it's just there's so many layers to it. But I think the most important thing is it's like having a group that builds awareness of each other. There's so many like kind of like minority composers, all different backgrounds that are kind of like the only person like working in their studio, and you kind of feel like you're the only one. And then it's like when we have these mixers once a month, we realize there's like so many of us working in LA and all over the world. It's like very empowering and very exciting, and it's like become a community that we can like draw on and just sort of advice and everything. So if you guys are curious about it, I can share everything about it. But it's this really, really cool group, and like we had a mixer at Netflix, and we kind of like showed like the data, just like historically where we've been, like in TV statistics and like top 200 US like theatrical statistics. And it's really important to know your data and kind of start there to like address like the pipeline problem. And so it's been exciting to kind of like create like a website and like have these events and like just kind of like inform like the studios that like we exist, and it's like an ongoing thing. And it's like kind of like pushing a boulder uphill. But I know, I think it's really important to like have like alongside all the work we do as composers, to have like a healthy dose of activism, just to kind of like make things better for everyone. So yeah, it's a lot. It's challenging, especially right now, but it's like just gotta like stay excited and just just kind of keep challenging the status quo, and what you like have to do.
Yeah.
There's like no choice. So this group is really great, and anyone can attend our events and meetings and be
Yeah. I was gonna say, and you said there's a website?
Yeah, so it's composers with an S, diversitycollective.org. And yeah, we have like a directory, and there's like an education branch, and there's like A&R, so I do kind of like studio liaison, and then there's like there's a whole bunch of different like outreach for like underserved communities, and kind of everyone's just like taken to what their strengths are and kind of like running with it. It's like very modular. It's a lot of fun. It's like whatever you feel like doing with it, you can kind of like do whatever you want with it. So it's pretty great. And I think so far so good. Studios are open to this type of dialogue and they don't feel threatened. Like huge group is like, hey, we're here. And I think the most important thing is like to kind of like dispel any kind of misconception about like a minority composer, thinking because of their certain background, like yes, they may be able to like speak to a certain type of culture and but like the instruments that are kind of like line with my culture or vibe or whatever. But knowing that we're able to kind of like do it.
Yeah.
So so it's just John and Pasqua and chattering the mix.
Well, that's super awesome. I can't wait to check out the website more and tweet about it and all that stuff.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I'm really fired up about all of that. Just exactly that continued, the expansion of the community that will serve all of us, because as I keep leaning on Star Trek, but hey, it's definitely been something, but the infinite diversity and infinite combinations that it's ultimately all of us can celebrate in all of our differences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, really excited to
yeah, thanks for asking.
All right, so Nathaniel, I just love saying your name. It's a great. So on Prodigal Son, would love to hear about how the music evolved. I know you obviously spoke earlier to some of your fun, innovative techniques and how you continue to evolve and adapt it as the season progressed.
Yeah, well, that element has remained, the surgical instruments, as a pretty central element to the sound of the show. In the pilot process, as probably a lot of people on this panel know, you get a lot of feedback from a lot of different people. Everyone from the editors, directors, producers, studio, network. And you have to kind of incorporate all of that into what you do. And I think we set a pretty good tone for the show from the get-go. So by episode 2 and onward, you're mostly dealing with the showrunners, who have been fantastic. But occasionally we were getting notes from Fox to make sure when the episode starts, we want to draw people in, we want to keep them in. The momentum's got to be going from the get-go, and it's just got to whip, through that whole first act. And of course, music is supposed to solve that problem a lot, but it was okay because it was fun to kind of be challenged to take it to the next level, and eventually that was just ingrained in my head. So a few episodes in, I just knew what I had to do in the first act, so that kind of became a part of the show. But throughout the season, there were some special things, like episode 9 was shot in more of like a noir style, and it really kind of called for the music to accent that. But while not venturing too far out from the sound that we'd established from the show. So it was a challenge to walk that line. And later in the season, there was an episode that took place at a ballet company while they're rehearsing for a production of Scheherazade. So again, it was I had the idea to incorporate Rimsky-Korsakov's ballet music into the score, and also to kind of use it where maybe the violin's playing the Scheherazade theme over the top of the surgical instrument percussion and stuff like that. And it would go in and out of the music coming from the stage as the ballet company's rehearsing, and it was a bit of a puzzle to work out. So it's just kind of cool to have a crime procedural show like that not stick to its world of the crime procedural format and mix it up like that. So I would imagine for season 2 we'll see what else we can throw into the mix, but it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Keep evolving and adapting. Yeah, so fun. Just across the board, I keep hearing that everyone's getting to play in so many different genres, which I just think is awesome.
Mhm.
Now, we are running a little bit low on time, but I do want to get through the rest of these questions. Everyone has given such exciting, fruitful answers. So we are gonna, I'm gonna start asking the questions now instead of talking about asking them. So Torin, if you could talk a little bit about what it was like working from a blank slate on a show that has so many different tones and moods.
Right. Well, so I really wanted to make sure that I was scoring like the Netflix version of the show because there's been other iterations of Locke Key. And so I do have a confession to make. I actually haven't read the comics themselves because I didn't want to be swayed. I know.
I didn't Jessica Jones either. I didn't do that either. Yeah, so
because you don't want to be swayed by something that didn't make it into the show, or happens differently in the show, and then you ruin a moment because you didn't realize. So it was a great opportunity to kind of start from the ground up and create this structure for the score with all the themes. And what was really cool about having so many different genres was that like having one theme kind of play through different genres and different scenarios, you can really develop that sound. So it's not just the same thing every time. Like Dodge's theme, for instance, it's on the solo cello and it's really aggressive and dark. And you hear the main theme in the first episode, and then an episode later, she's choking someone, and you hear a slower but like tense version of it, and you can hear her like tighten her grip. And a lot of times the characters are talking about her, so it's kind of in the background, but it's really moody. But if you listen closely, it's still her theme. And any of these examples, you can't really, you can't replace them wherever. They're really specific to the scene, but it really helps, creatively like flow throughout the show. And because there's so many genres, I felt like it really helped to do each one specifically and strongly so that there was no confusion. Like when they're in the caves, it's adventure music. When it's horror, it's full-blown horror music. So I felt the score kind of helps to clarify this complex world, with the themes and the genres and all that.
Now, Sean, if you could give us a quick teaser on this new Fox show Next that premieres in the fall that you've been working on, and what we can expect to hear from your music.
I'll be very quick about it. If anybody has an Alexa device, it's about the notion of an Alexa device becoming sentient and self-aware and screwing with people's lives. And it stars the guy John Slattery from Mad Men. And there are exactly 5 cues in every episode. Act 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just a wall-to-wall.
Wow.
But it's a really interesting story about the notion that we use technology in GPS, elevators, air travel, when people are missing, and if something was sentient and trying to survive, how would it mess with our lives? So I thought it was a pretty interesting show, and John Slattery's great. So
yeah, it sounds really fun. I can't wait to check it out. Maggie, do you have a dream song that you are saving for just the right project?
Yes, super quick answer. I have a ton, but I'll never share them because I'm saving them. I will use my answer to just say, Amanda, I'm glad to meet you, and I'm going to talk to you afterwards if that's okay. Because
yeah, sure.
We play a huge role in putting composers in front of the showrunners and producers in the studios to decide. So I'd love to connect with you after, and also encourage any other music supervisors who are listening to do the same, because it's just about getting informed about who's available. So yeah. Thank you.
Yay! Amanda, as a short answer on some of the challenges or difficulties you might have faced while scoring Cherish the Day, or
I think maybe I've touched on it a little bit. It was just kind of like getting past my personality of just being a little bit shy sometimes. Mm-hmm. But in terms of on paper and skill set and whatever, I could knock all this stuff out, and that was great. But just getting over that fact of just being oh my gosh, I'm in this space. It's just rare air, and I'm really excited. So I had to just be okay, confident, you're fine. You can do this. It's all good.
Totally. Cool. Thank you. All right, Jeff. So you won the Emmy for Fargo and received 2 additional nominations for your work on the show. We're very excited for the new season, but sadly the production had to stop once the pandemic started, that old ditty. So how have you managed to continue working during quarantine, and what does your typical day consist of? That, in one sentence.
I've been working at home. I moved a big rig from my studio to my house, and I just sort of go from one room to the spare bedroom, and that's how I've been doing it. Luckily, Star Trek Discovery had finished production, so post production everybody was just working at home, so we'll be able to finish that. That season of the show. We were not able to get the season finished of Fargo. We got through 8 episodes, and we're going to finish the final 2 when they can go back into production. But I'm continuing to finish that, and we will finish all 8 of those. So it's the same with basically anything that had started prior to the lockdown. I got to finish everything. I finished the Umbrella Academy season 2. Which is coming out in July, and another show that I worked on called Cursed, which is also on Netflix, also coming out in July. So all those things had finished production beforehand, and we were able to do it. We had to put together a remote orchestra for all of those shows, including Star Trek, which is 40 people all in their bedrooms or all in their garages or all of them, talking to my my engineer about where to put the mic, what mic to use, how to do this and how to do that, and how to get the most out of that sound, so we could then take all 40 of those performances, edit them together, and magically make them sound like we were actually at the Warner Brothers scoring stage or the Fox scoring stage, which is the 2 places that I normally work. And that has been extremely time consuming and complicated, but it has been extremely fulfilling.
Well, that's good. I know this is a whole new frontier. It's not the final frontier, but it's it's definitely a whole new one. Yeah. I have for Nathaniel a question about that you worked with Dermot Mulroney, who we love from My Best Friend's Wedding and his role on Prodigal Son, that he actually played on your score for the show. If you could talk about the recording sessions for Prodigal Son, both pre and post quarantine, and what it was like to work with him.
Yes. So he started appearing on the show late in the season as the main villain, Nicholas Endicott. And when I heard that he was going to be on the show, I already knew that he was a cellist, because he's a card-carrying musicians union member who plays on all these sessions in town. And so I just knew he had to play. He had to play his theme for the show. So throughout the season, we didn't record every episode, but a few episodes did have a 40-piece string orchestra, and that we were planning to do at the end of the season, but of course, quarantine kicked in, and I still wanted Dermot to be involved, and we didn't quite record all 40 of them. I wish we could have. That's amazing that you did that, Jeff. But because as he said, I mean, it's time consuming enough to prepare and record 40 musicians on a recording stage, but now to do it remotely, there's so many more things thrown in the mix. Luckily, Dermot was game to take all of that on, as were a few other musicians. We had about 7 total. And we just did our best to enhance it with the samples and make it sound as big and epic as the previous episodes. But yeah, Dermot was fantastic.
I love that. It's so, yeah. Again, I feel like we are concluding now, and I feel like the themes I'm picking up from this overall conversation is that we are in a world of collaboration and innovation, and we're all trying to figure out exactly what's going on right now in every facet. But as much as I know I sometimes get a little scared and freaked out about everything, I do moments like this where I'm around a bunch of incredible artists who are collaborative and working hard to create great art. I'm just very heartened and excited to hear about all the relationships that you have built throughout behind the scenes. So thank you all so much for sharing all of these great stories.
Hey, thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You guys are absolutely wonderful. I think was there one more question, or am I wrapping this up?
You could wrap it up if you want.
Okay.
It's over one or two, but it feels good. We can wrap it up.
Okay, great. I think yes. I am just really, really thrilled. And I have my music.
Fanfare.
Oh yes, I love it. Fabulous. But yes, thank you so much to Comic-Con and to Jana and Alex at Rhapsody PR for organizing this fantastic event, and again for letting me be involved as a geek of all kinds and a lover of music and all the work everyone does. So thank you everyone who tuned in, wherever you're tuning in from virtually. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy, and that we all are moving towards a brighter, better future.
Nice.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.